There is a kind of pain that does not make noise. It does not scream. It does not shake the walls or break the furniture or announce itself at the door. It is the quiet kind, the kind that sits in the corner of a room and watches you go about your day, and waits. It waits until the house is empty and the lights are off, and there is nothing left to distract you. And then it walks right up to your chest and presses down with both hands and reminds you that it never left, that it has been there the whole time, that it will keep being there for as long as it wants. Kazuya Mori knew this pain better than most. He was 24 years old and he was the most feared man in the entire city. People crossed the street when they heard his name coming. Grown men who had done terrible things in dark places sat up a little straighter when someone mentioned the Black Wolves, because the Black Wolves meant Kazuya, and Kazuya meant that whatever was about to happen to you was going to be final. He was not cruel for the pleasure of it. He was simply someone who had learned very early that the world only respected people who refused to flinch, so he stopped flinching. He stopped showing anything at all. He built a face like stone and a voice like winter and a reputation that wrapped around him like armor, and for 2 years that armor had done its job. But every single night, without fail, before he turned off the lamp in his office and went to the empty place where sleep was supposed to be, Kazuya opened the bottom drawer of his dark mahogany desk and took out a photograph. It was not a grand photograph. It was small, slightly bent at the corner from being held too many times, and it showed 2 boys sitting on a rooftop somewhere, laughing so hard they were leaning into each other like they might fall over. The boy on the left had sharp dark eyes and a rare open smile that looked almost too soft for his face. That was Kazuya at 17, before the world had finished making him hard. The boy on the right had warm brown hair that the wind had made into a mess, and the most unguarded expression imaginable, like he had never once in his life felt the need to hide how happy he was. That was Ren Sato, Kazuya's childhood best friend, his first person, his first everything. Kazuya would hold the photograph for exactly as long as it took for the pain to climb up into his throat and threaten to become something visible. Then he would put it away, close the drawer, and go back to being the man nobody questioned. Ren had been dead for 2 years. That was what everyone told him. That was what the papers said, what the witnesses swore to, what the grave with Ren's name carved into white stone confirmed every time Kazuya drove past it on the edge of the East Quarter, which he stopped doing after the 3rd month because it made his hands shake on the steering wheel, and he could not afford shaking hands. There had been an explosion at a building used by a small rival faction called the Grey Hands. Ren had been there. Nobody could fully explain why or how, because Ren had nothing to do with that world. But the evidence was presented, and it was clean, and it was official, and Kazuya had no reason in the world to doubt it. He had cried once, the night they told him. He sat alone in this same office, in this same chair, and he pressed both hands over his mouth and let himself make that sound, the one that lives in a place deeper than your lungs. And he let himself feel every terrible thing for exactly 1 night. Then morning came, and Kazuya Mori put grief in the same drawer as the photograph and became something colder and more dangerous than anything he had been before, because there was nothing left to be soft for. 2 years, 730 mornings of waking up and choosing the armor over the ache, and then came the night of the raid. It had started as a business matter, which was how most things started in Kazuya's world. Or for several weeks, a nuisance of a group called the Silver Foxes had been creeping along the edges of Black Wolf territory like mice who did not understand that the house belonged to a cat. They were small. Nobody serious knew much about them, which was itself slightly unusual. But they had been stealing shipments, cutting off small supply routes, and generally making themselves an expensive inconvenience. Kazuya's cousin and second in command, Daichi Mori, had been advising patience. He kept saying the Silver Foxes were too small to be worth the energy of a direct move, that they would scatter on their own, that there were bigger things to focus on. Kazuya had listened to this advice for as long as he intended to. Then Sora, his most trusted fighter, On a sharp-eyed young man of 25 who had a gift for noticing the things other people decided not to notice, brought him something interesting. Sora had quietly followed the Silver Fox's movements back to a source, and the source was an old warehouse on the far east edge of the city, pressed up against the waterfront where the streetlights were too far apart, and the fog came in thick off the river at night. Someone had been living there for a while. The setup was more permanent than it should have been for a group that was supposedly small and scattered. Kazuya looked at the information Sora laid out on his desk. He thought about Daiichi's repeated suggestions to wait. He picked up his jacket. "Tonight," he said. That was all. The raid itself was efficient. Kazuya led 15 of his best people through the fog to the warehouse doors, and they went through them the way a stone goes through water, fast and without apology. The Silver Foxes inside scattered almost immediately, which was interesting in itself. People who expected to win a fight do not run that quickly. They ran like people who had always known this night might come and had decided that when it did, the thing inside the warehouse was more important to protect than their own pride. Most of them were rounded up in the first 10 minutes. The main floor was cleared, but there was a long hallway in the back, poorly lit, that led deeper into the building. Kazuya walked it alone. Not because it was wise. Sora would have said it was not wise. But because something in his chest had gone strange and quiet the moment he stepped into that building, the way the air goes strange before weather changes. He could not explain it. He walked the hallway anyway. There was a door at the end. Old wood. A thin line of warm yellow light underneath it. Kazuya pushed it open, and the entire world he had spent 2 years building, every wall, every layer of armor, every stone-faced morning of choosing not to feel, simply stopped. The room was soft in a way that made no sense inside a warehouse. Someone had made it gentle. There was a small woven rug on the floor, a tiny wooden crib in the corner with a blue blanket hanging over one side, a low table with half a cup of something warm still steaming on it, a lamp with a yellow shade pushing warm light over everything, and in the center of that warm light, standing with his back pressed against the far wall, his arms wrapped so tightly around a sleeping baby that his knuckles had gone pale, his eyes so wide they looked like they might swallow his whole face, was Ren Sato, alive, breathing, real. Kazuya's mind did something that minds rarely do. It simply stopped producing thoughts. There was no language available. There was no process running. There was only the image in front of him. Ren, older by 2 years, thinner than he used to be, with longer hair that fell across his forehead in a way it never used to, wearing a plain gray sweater with a small paint stain on the sleeve, holding a sleeping infant against his chest like that baby was the only thing in the universe worth protecting, and staring at Kazuya with an expression that held about 40 different things at once and had room for none of them. "Kazu," Ren whispered. His voice was the same. 2 years. And it was exactly the same. A little rough at the edges the way it always got when he was frightened, warm underneath in a way that nothing in Kazuya's memory had managed to recreate accurately enough to stop hurting. Kazuya's gun, which he had been carrying in his right hand from the moment he entered the warehouse, hit the floor. He did not decide to drop it. His fingers simply let go of it on their own, the way a person lets go of something when their body understands something that their brain is still catching up to. "You're alive," Kazuya said. His voice came out wrong, fractured and thin, and nothing like the voice he used for the rest of the world. "You're Ren. You're alive." Ren's lips pressed together. His eyes went glassy. He held the baby tighter. Kazuya's gaze moved to the child. Dark eyes, currently closed in sleep. A round face. Tiny fingers curled against Ren's collar. The baby could not have been more than a year old, perhaps a little more, and something about the line of that small nose and the particular curve of those closed eyes struck Kazuya somewhere in his chest with a sensation he had no name for. Recognition, maybe, or something stranger and deeper than that. "Whose child is that?" Kazuya said. The words came out flat and cold because that was the only way they could come out when his voice had no steadiness left to work with. Ren did not answer immediately. He looked at Kazuya for a long moment with those 2 wide eyes, and whatever he was calculating or deciding or gathering the courage for, It happened silently in the space between them. Then, he took a breath so slow it looked like it cost him something. "His name is Haru," Ren said, quietly, carefully. The way someone speaks when they know what they are about to say is going to change the shape of the room. "He is yours, Kazu. He is our son." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Kazuya had ever heard. He walked forward, slowly, the way a person moves when they are not entirely sure their legs are still connected to their body. Ren did not back away this time, even though his whole frame was trembling. Kazuya stopped directly in front of them, close enough to see the dried tear tracks on Ren's face, the faint shadows under his eyes that spoke of a very long time spent being frightened and awake. The way Haru's tiny chest rose and fell in perfect, peaceful rhythm against his father's heartbeat. Close enough to see that this was real, that none of this was a dream born from the drawer in his desk. Kazuya looked at his son's face for a long time. Then Haru did something that nobody could have planned and nobody could have predicted. He opened his eyes, dark eyes, just like Kazuya's. He looked directly up at the large and terrifying man standing over him with the expression that only very small children can produce: pure, unguarded, unafraid curiosity. Then his little face arranged itself into the beginning of a sleepy smile, and his hand reached up toward nothing in particular and grasped the air. Something happened in Kazuya's chest that he was entirely unequipped to handle. He stepped back. He turned away. He pressed one hand over his mouth for exactly 3 seconds, because 3 seconds was what he allowed himself. And then he dropped it and turned back around, and when he spoke again his voice was winter again, but a different kind of winter this time. Not the empty kind, the held-back kind. 2 years, he said. Every word measured, every word costing something. 2 years I stood at a grave with your name on it. 2 years I thought you were gone. And the whole time, you were here, alive, with my son, and you said nothing. His jaw was so tight the words barely had room to come out. You let me think you were dead, Ren. You let me grieve you. And you never, not once, told me. Kazu, not tonight. He cut the words off, not with anger, but with something that was trying very hard not to become anger, because there was also the baby to consider, and the baby was asleep, and somehow that mattered to him immediately and completely. Tonight you come with me, both of you, and tomorrow you are going to tell me everything. Every single thing, from the beginning. And it is going to be the truth. He turned to the door. He stopped without looking back. Yuki, he said to the empty room. There was a pause, and then from behind the inner door, a young woman emerged slowly, small, sharp-eyed, her dark hair in a braid, her expression cycling rapidly through frightened and defiant before landing somewhere in between. Yuki, 22 years old, and clearly the person who had been helping Ren survive, which meant she was also coming with them. How did you know I was there? She asked. Your shadow under the door, Kazuya said. Then he walked out. Behind him, Ren pressed his face into Haru's soft hair for one moment. Just one. He breathed in the familiar warm baby smell of his son and let it steady him. Then he looked at Yuki, who was making a face that said approximately 17 things simultaneously. We go with him, Ren said quietly. Are you absolutely sure? Yuki asked. Ren looked toward the door through which Kazuya had just walked. 2 years of running, 2 years of hiding, 2 years of letters he never sent, and a name he whispered to himself on the hardest nights, because saying it out loud made the loneliness slightly more bearable. He looked at his son, who was looking at the doorway with those curious dark eyes like something interesting had just happened. Yes, Ren said. It's time. The mansion had always been a large and serious place. It had been designed to impress and to intimidate in equal measure. High ceilings, dark wood floors that held sound in a particular way that made every footstep feel like a statement. Windows that were tall and let in light, but somehow arranged themselves so that the light felt formal rather than warm. The staff moved through it quietly and efficiently, because that was what working for Kazuya Mori required. Things happened on schedule. Voices were kept at appropriate levels. No one left doors open unnecessarily or left things out of their proper places. The mansion was powerful the way Kazuya was powerful, controlled, deliberate, and slightly cold in all the ways that could not be fixed by turning up the heat. And then Haru arrived. Nobody on the staff was prepared for Haru. He was 14 months old, and he had absolutely no understanding of or interest in the concept of quietness. He had opinions about things, loud, pressing, immediate opinions that he expressed with his whole body and a set of lungs that were impressive for someone who weighed 11 kilograms. He wanted to touch everything he was not supposed to touch. He wanted to put in his mouth everything he was not supposed to put in his mouth. He found the dark wood floors extremely exciting for the purposes of crawling at high speed and crashing into things. He had no awareness whatsoever that the man who kept appearing at the edge of rooms to watch him was the most feared person in the entire city, and treated this fact with the cheerful indifference that only babies and very enlightened monks can manage. Kazuya, for his part, did not know what to do with any of this. He had given Ren a room, a good room, warm and quiet, on the east side of the house where the morning light came in through the curtains. He had given Haru a space next to it and had one of his staff find a proper crib within the same evening, because whatever else was complicated about this situation, the child was not going to sleep in a warehouse crib. Yuki was given a room on the same floor because Haru, as previously mentioned, had opinions about Yuki's proximity, and those opinions were non-negotiable. These arrangements were made efficiently and without discussion, because Kazuya was extremely good at solving logistical problems, and it was much easier to organize the sleeping arrangements than it was to organize his thoughts. He did not speak to Ren that night. He did not speak to him the following morning either. He came down to the kitchen at his usual hour and found Ren already there with Haru on his hip and a cup of warm tea in his free hand, navigating the space with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this one-handed for over a year. And Kazuya looked at this scene for approximately 4 seconds, said nothing, poured himself coffee, and left. Ren watched him go. He held his teacup a little tighter. From the hallway, Sora, who had been observing all of this with great personal interest, raised both eyebrows at no one in particular and went about his day. The silence between Kazuya and Ren over those first days was not an empty silence. It was a full one. It was packed with everything that could not yet be said safely. All the hurt and confusion and the need to understand that Kazuya was pressing down with the same interior force he applied to everything that threatened to be bigger than he could manage publicly. He watched Ren. He did not mean to watch Ren. Or rather, he meant not to. But watching happened anyway. He watched from the doorway of the sitting room as Ren sat on the rug and stacked soft blocks with Haru for 20 minutes, his whole attention given over completely to the task of making a 1-year-old laugh. He watched from the far end of the long hallway as Ren carried Haru down toward the garden doors, pointing at things and saying their names quietly: tree, window, bird, cloud, the way parents do, as though naming the world is the first gift you give a child. He watched late in the afternoon of the second day as Ren stood at the tall east window, holding a sleeping Haru against his chest, and looking out at the city with an expression that Kazuya could not fully read from where he was standing, but that looked something like relief and something like grief simultaneously, the way things do when they are complicated enough to be both at once. On the third night, when the house had gone quiet and Haru had been settled and Yuki had gone to her room, Kazuya walked to Ren's door and knocked 3 times. Ren opened it like he had been waiting for this moment. He probably had been. Kazuya stepped inside. He did not sit immediately. He looked around the room, at the small things Ren had already made personal in the space of 3 days, a book on the nightstand, Haru's spare blanket folded neatly over the chair, a small drawing Haru had apparently made that morning stuck to the wall with a single piece of tape. A drawing that was technically unidentifiable as anything but which Ren had put on the wall anyway, because it was Haru's. Kazuya looked at this for a moment. Then he sat in the chair across from the bed, and Ren sat on the edge of the bed, and they were facing each other in the lamplight, with 2 years of distance between them. "Tell me," Kazuya said. "Everything. From the beginning. Leave nothing out." And Ren told him. He had been turning this telling over in his mind for 2 years. The order of it, the words, how to make it make sense to someone who had not been there for it. Now the words came not dramatically but plainly, the way the truth usually comes when someone has been carrying it long enough to be exhausted by its weight. He started 2 years and a few months ago, on an ordinary afternoon when he had gone to Kazuya's office to leave him a message because Kazuya was out at a meeting and Ren had a habit of leaving handwritten notes in the office instead of sending messages digitally because Kazuya had once said, without much ceremony, that he preferred them. He had gone looking for a pen in the desk drawer, the middle one where Kazuya kept small things, and the pen he found was sitting on top of a file folder he had never seen before. He would not have looked at it except that his own name was written on the tab. His name, on a file in Kazuya's desk, in handwriting that was not Kazuya's. He had opened it. What he found inside was not about him in the way he feared. It was not information about him. It was a collection of documents, carefully organized, that told a story about the Black Wolves. A story about money going places it should not go. About shipment information being given to rival groups before operations could take place. About meetings being arranged in secret with the Black Wolves' worst enemies. And at the bottom of every document, on every communication, in the careful handwriting of someone who had been doing this for a long time and was confident enough to be almost careless, Daiichi's name. Ren had stood in that office with those papers in his hands and understood 2 things at the same time. First, Daiichi was betraying everything and everyone in the Black Wolves, including Kazuya, and had been doing so for some time. Second, these papers were in Kazuya's desk, which meant either Kazuya had already found them, or, and this was the possibility that made his hands start to shake, someone had put them there, and Kazuya did not know they existed yet. He did not yet understand the full geometry of the trap he had walked into. He only understood that what he was holding was dangerous. He had put the papers back. He had left without the note he came to write. He had gone home and spent an entire night trying to decide what to do. He never got the chance to decide, because by the next morning, Daiichi was at his door. The conversation was short. Daiichi did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He was someone who understood that the most frightening versions of things are the ones delivered calmly. He told Ren, in the pleasant and measured tone of a person discussing weather, that he knew Ren had been in the office. He knew what Ren had seen, and he explained, with the patient thoroughness of someone who had planned for this possibility, that he had already prepared a version of events in which Ren was the traitor, forged communication, constructed evidence, witnesses who would confirm what Daiichi needed them to confirm. He told Ren that if he said one word to Kazuya, all of that prepared evidence would be delivered immediately, and Kazuya would have no reason to disbelieve it. And then, and Ren's voice went flat and very controlled when he reached this part of the telling, Daiichi told him that if this happened, neither Ren nor the child that Daiichi had apparently already learned about through means Ren still did not fully understand would survive the week. Ren sat with this information for 6 hours. Then he packed one bag, called Yuki, who had been a gentle and kind presence in the household, and who had, over many quiet months, become someone Ren trusted the way you trust people who have shown you their goodness in small, consistent ways over time. And he told her what had happened. Yuki had said, without pausing even a moment to think about it, "Tell me where we're going." They had left that night. Daiichi had arranged the explosion 2 days later and built the story of Ren's death from the rubble. As Ren finished speaking, the room was very quiet, and the lamplight had not changed. The house was still. Down the hall, through 2 closed doors, Haru was sleeping with absolute conviction the way babies sleep when they are fed and warm and loved. Kazuya had not moved during the telling. He had listened the way he did everything, with complete and focused attention, nothing leaking through the surface. But his hands, resting on the arms of the chair, had tightened around the wood at certain points in the story. At the part about the forged evidence, at the part about the threat, at the part, and this was the part that made his knuckles go white briefly before he released, about the child, about Daichi knowing, about Daichi having turned that knowledge into a weapon without hesitation. When Ren finished, Kazuya looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You wrote letters." Ren blinked. It was not what he expected. "What?" "You mentioned letters. When they brought you in that first night, you had a bag. You said you have them still." Ren was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and went to the bag that sat in the corner of the room and returned with something that he placed on the small table between them. It was a bundle of folded papers, many different sizes, some thin from handling, some thicker, tied together with a piece of brown string in a bow that looked like it had been tied and untied and retied many times. He sat back down. Kazuya reached out and took the bundle. He looked at Ren once, asking a question without words. Ren nodded once, answering it without words in the shorthand of people who knew each other before they knew language. Kazuya opened the first letter. He read them all. It was not a quick thing. Some of the letters were short, a few lines, written on whatever paper was available, in the cramped handwriting of someone who was tired and wanted to get the words out before the feeling passed. Others were long, pages of careful writing, things Ren had tried to explain to himself as much as to the person he was writing to. There were letters from the early days of hiding, when fear was still brand new and urgent. Letters from the months in between, when fear had settled into something more permanent and harder to carry. Letters about the pregnancy. Quiet, careful letters written in the tone of someone choosing their words like they might shatter, describing what it was like to do something that should have been shared alone. One letter described, with the specificity of someone who needed to believe their words would eventually be received, the exact moment Haru was born, the sound he made, the way his eyes looked in those first minutes, the way Yuki cried even though she pretended she was not crying. At the bottom of every single letter, without exception, in writing that was slightly different from the rest, more deliberate, more pressed in, like it was written with more intention, were 4 words: "Come back to me." Kazuya read those words 14 times over the course of reading those letters. He sat with them each time. He moved on. He kept going. When he had finished the last letter, he folded it carefully back into its original creases and placed the bundle on the table. He looked at his own hands for a moment. Then he looked at Ren. Ren's face was not trying to be anything in that moment. He had run out of the ability to manage his expression. His eyes were bright with tears that had not quite fallen, and his hands were pressed together in his lap, and he was simply waiting, the way people wait when they have put everything they have into the open, and there is nothing left to do but find out what the other person does with it. "I believe you," Kazuya said. Not quickly, not easily, like something being said for the first time after being true for a while. "Everything you've told me, I believe it." Ren's breath came out slowly. His shoulders came down about an inch. "I am not ready to say the hurt is gone," Kazuya continued, with the particular honesty of someone who does not do themselves the injustice of pretending. "I don't know how long that will take. I am not going to pretend it's simple when it isn't." He paused. "But I am also sorry for the part of this that is mine." Another pause, shorter, like he was being careful with the weight of it. "You were afraid to come to me. That means I had not made you feel safe enough to come to me. That is something I did, or failed to do. I am sorry for that." Ren stared at him. "You're apologizing," Ren said. It came out like a statement, but it was really a question. "I just did. Yes," Kazuya said. Ren pressed his lips together. His face did several things very quickly, and then the tears that had been waiting fell, not dramatically, not in a flood, but in the quiet way of things that have been held a very long time, one and then another running down his face while the rest of him stayed still. He did not sob. He did not cover his face. He just sat there and let them fall, and looked at Kazuya like he was something Ren had been trying to find the road back to for 2 very long years. Kazuya moved his chair. He moved it closer. Not all the way. There was still distance between them, still territory that needed time to cross, but closer. Enough that if Ren reached out, he would not be reaching very far. They sat like that for a while, in the lamplight, not saying anything, in the particular quiet that lives on the other side of a very hard conversation. The next morning was the first morning everything shifted. Haru, released from Yuki's supervision and deployed into the hallway at full crawling speed, rounded the corner of the kitchen doorway and found Kazuya at the table with his coffee and his morning documents. Haru stopped. He looked at Kazuya with those dark eyes. Kazuya looked back at him with the same eyes, in a slightly larger face. The resemblance, in this moment of mutual examination, was quietly extraordinary. Then Haru crawled directly to him, grabbed onto the leg of Kazuya's trousers with both small fists, and pulled himself up to standing. He looked up. He opened his mouth, showing 4 small teeth, and produced a sound that Ren, watching from the doorway, holding his tea, his heart in approximately 12 places at once, had only ever heard him make for people he had decided were his. Kazuya looked down at this small person gripping his trouser leg with great determination. He looked at the tiny face looking up at him. He set down his coffee cup very carefully. And then, with the grave and focused attention he gave to all important operations, he reached down and picked up his son for the very first time. Haru grabbed his nose immediately, and on Kazuya Mori's face, the face that had been stoned for 2 years, the face the whole city arranged themselves carefully around, something happened that none of his staff would ever forget, regardless of how professionally they tried to appear as though they were not watching. He smiled. A real one, the kind that reaches all the way up into the eyes and stays there and cannot be recalled. Ren pressed his free hand over his mouth. He was smiling too and crying again, quietly, and trying very hard to do neither loudly. But Sora, passing the kitchen doorway, saw all of it. He looked at the ceiling for a moment with an expression of profound personal satisfaction. Then he went about his day because Sora was professional. But he walked slightly lighter than usual for the rest of the morning. And all the while, on the other side of the city, in a well-furnished office that belonged to a man who believed he had everything arranged perfectly, Daiichi sat behind his desk and thought about the raid on the Silver Fox's warehouse, which he had heard about, and thought about the fact that the warehouse had been cleared and a few members of the Silver Foxes had been taken in. He was not worried. The Silver Foxes were a dead end by design. There was nothing there that connected back to him. He was completely safe. He was very wrong. Because Sora had not stopped looking. Sora had never stopped looking. And what Sora had found, and brought quietly to Kazuya's study that same afternoon, was not just a thread. It was the whole tightly wound thing, waiting to be pulled. Kazuya sat with the evidence Sora placed before him. He read it carefully, all of it. He read Daiichi's name at the bottom of page after page. He read the dates. He read the amounts. He read the names of the operations that had failed because someone had warned the other side. He read the correspondence between Daiichi and the people who had been paying him. He sat with all of it for a long time. Then he looked up at Sora. "How long have you had this?" he asked. "Parts of it a while," Sora said honestly. "All of it. 72 hours. Kazuya nodded. He looked at the papers. He thought about Ren in the warehouse. He thought about Haru on his lap that morning, grabbing his nose with both hands like it was something that belonged to him. He thought about a bundle of letters tied with brown string and 4 words written at the bottom of every single one. "We do this right," he said. "We do this completely. No loose ends, no rushing. We take everything he has, his position, his reputation, his freedom. We do it where everyone can see. And we do it so cleanly that there is no version of events in which he gets to tell a different story." Sora looked at him. "How long do we wait?" "As long as it takes," Kazuya said. "He's waited 2 years already to take what he wants. He can wait a little longer." He closed the file folder. "And tell no one. Not yet. Not until I say." He stood up. He went to find his son. The weeks that followed were a study in 2 things happening at the same time. On the surface, everything was as it had always been. The Black Wolves operated with their usual precision. Kazuya attended every meeting. He sat at the head of every table. He made decisions in the cold, efficient way that had always defined him, and he consulted Daiichi with the same level of engagement he always had, asking for his input, appearing to take it seriously, showing nothing behind his eyes that could be read as anything other than normalcy. Daiichi, for his part, was comfortable. He had been comfortable for 2 years. Comfort had made him excellent at not looking too closely at things that might disrupt it. This was Daiichi's one fatal flaw in a life that otherwise ran on calculation. He had stopped respecting his cousin somewhere along the way. He respected Kazuya's reputation, the way you respect a thunderstorm, at a distance, when it is not aimed at you. But he did not believe that Kazuya, in his grief and his isolation of the last 2 years, could be watching him. He did not believe the raid on the Silver Foxes was anything but a routine business operation. He certainly did not believe that whatever had been inside that warehouse had anything to do with him now. So he walked through those weeks comfortable and unaware, which was exactly where Kazuya needed him. And underneath the surface, quiet as roots moving through winter ground, something else was growing entirely. It grew in small, ordinary moments, the way the most lasting things tend to. It grew in the mornings, which began to take on a shape they had not had before. Kazuya, who had always kept the earliest hours of the day entirely his own. Coffee, documents, the particular silence of a house not yet fully awake, found those hours filling up with other things. Haru did not understand the concept of being left out of things. If someone was awake and in a room, Haru believed he should also be awake and in that room, contributing. His contribution was generally to touch things and make sounds, and look at people with those large dark eyes as if he found them absolutely riveting, which was disarming in a way that Kazuya's considerable armor had not been designed to manage. By the second week, Kazuya had stopped being surprised to find Haru arriving at the kitchen table under his own power, and had started keeping a small cup of soft fruit pieces on the table in the morning at a particular spot. Because he had noticed what Haru liked and acted on it the way he acted on all important intelligence, quietly, without announcement, and with more care than he was admitting to himself. Ren noticed. Ren noticed everything, because watching Kazuya was something he had been doing since he was old enough to pay attention, and he knew all of Kazuya's languages, including the ones Kazuya did not know he was speaking. The fruit cup appeared on day 7, and Ren stood at the counter holding his tea and felt something in the region of his heart do something that he had been telling himself, with great discipline, was not going to happen yet. That it was too soon. That there was still too much unresolved territory between them to let himself feel it fully. He felt it anyway. He was not entirely surprised by this. He had always been slightly better at feeling things than he was at not feeling them. The conversations continued too. Most of them happened late at night, after Haru was asleep and the house was quiet. They would find themselves in the same room without quite planning it. The kitchen, or the long sitting room with the large windows that looked out over the garden, or occasionally the study where Kazuya worked, into which Ren had apparently been silently re-granted entry at some point without a formal announcement. They talked about practical things first. Haru's schedule, what Yuki needed, the arrangements for their safety going forward. Then, gradually, the way a river finds its level, the conversations moved toward other things. They talked about the years before everything. Memories surfaced like objects that had been underwater for a while. Still intact, still true, but slightly different in quality. Interesting to hold up and look at with eyes that had grown. They talked about the year they were 15 and had gotten spectacularly lost in a city they did not know, and spent 6 hours finding their way back, arguing the whole time but not actually worried because they were together. They talked about the roof in the photograph, who had taken it, and why they were laughing, which Ren remembered and Kazuya did not, because the ability to hold on to laughter had always been more Ren's talent than his. One night Kazuya said, without particular introduction, "I drove past the grave in the East Quarter, 3 times a week for the first 3 months. Then I stopped." Ren looked at him carefully. Why did you stop?" "Because it wasn't making the grief smaller," Kazuya said. "It was just making it more regular." A pause. "I thought if I visited often enough, eventually it would start to feel like something resolved, something finished. It never did." Ren was quiet for a moment. "Does that make you angry? Now that you know why it never felt finished?" Kazuya thought about this with the seriousness he gave everything. "I think it makes me relieved," he said finally. that my grief knew something I didn't. Ren looked at him. Kazuya looked at the window. Somewhere in that exchange, something shifted very slightly between them again, like furniture rearranging itself one careful inch at a time to make room. He gave Ren back the photograph on a Thursday evening. He simply walked to Ren's room and knocked, and when Ren opened the door, he held it out. Ren took it and looked at it for a long time and then looked at Kazuya. "We were so young," he said. "We were ridiculous," Kazuya said, which for him was affectionate. "You're smiling in it," Ren pointed out. "I'm aware. You never smiled like that. I smiled more than you remember." "Kazu," Ren said, with the tone of someone who knows they are right and is enjoying it moderately. "I was there." Kazuya looked away from the photograph and toward the far wall. The corner of his mouth moved in a way it had almost forgotten how to. "Go to sleep, Ren," he said, and walked back down the hallway. But the corner of his mouth did not go back to where it started. Sora, meanwhile, was completing the architecture of the trap with quiet efficiency and considerable personal satisfaction. He had, over the span of those careful weeks, assembled something extraordinary. A complete and documented picture of every transaction, every communication, every operation that Daichi had compromised over the span of years. He had witnesses. He had records. He had the kind of evidence that does not have a counter-argument, because it was built not from one source but from many, all of them pointing in the same direction. He brought Kazuya the final piece on a Wednesday afternoon and placed it on the desk and said simply, "It's complete." Kazuya looked at everything. He took his time. He thought about Ren in the warehouse, holding their son with white-knuckled hands, having run for 2 years from something Kazuya should have been the person to protect him from. He thought about the grave in the East Quarter. He thought about a bundle of letters tied with string. He thought about Haru's face turning toward him that first morning, like a small sun looking for something to warm. He thought about Daichi, who had sat across from him at countless tables and maintained his pleasant, comfortable expression, and who had believed that Kazuya's grief made him blind. "Call a full meeting," Kazuya said. "This Saturday. Mandatory attendance for everyone with a position. Tell them I have an announcement about the future of the organization. Make it sound significant." "It will be significant," Sora observed. "Yes," Kazuya said. "It will." He left one other instruction, which he delivered personally, by going to Ren's room that same evening and standing in the doorway, while Haru investigated the bottom shelf of the bookcase with intense scientific focus. "Saturday," he said. I need you there." Ren looked up from where he was sitting on the rug, ready to intercept Haru's explorations as needed. He looked at Kazuya. He understood what Saturday was. He had been told about the meeting, about the plan, about what was going to happen. He had been asked earlier in the week if he wanted to be present. He had said yes immediately, with the quiet certainty of someone who had been carrying a fear for 2 years and was ready to set it down somewhere visible. "I'll be there," he said. Saturday arrived gray and still, the kind of morning that holds its breath. The meeting was called for 7 in the evening, in the large, formal room that Kazuya used for gatherings of significance. By 6:30, every seat was filled. Every person who held a position in the Black Wolves was present, because when Kazuya Mori said mandatory, the word worked as advertised. The energy in the room was curious and slightly tense, not frightened, but alert. People knew when something important was coming the way you know when weather is about to change. The air has a particular quality. Daichi arrived at 6:45. He was dressed well, and his expression was arranged in the pleasant, slightly proprietorial way it had taken on over the past months. The look of a man who believed he was very close to something he had wanted for a long time. He took his usual seat to the right of the head of the table. He smiled at people. He was comfortable. Kazuya entered at 7 precisely. The room settled immediately, the way rooms do when he walks into them. He went to the head of the table and remained standing. He looked around at every face in the room with the slow and complete attention of someone taking inventory, and when his gaze passed over Daichi, It did not pause. It moved on exactly as it moved over everyone else. Daiichi noticed nothing. 2 years ago, Kazuya began, and the room was so still that his voice reached every corner without effort. This organization suffered losses. We lost operations. We lost money. We lost advantage to our rivals in situations where we should have had every benefit. Those of you who were here remember this. You accepted the explanations that were offered. I accepted them too. He let that sit for a moment. I should not have accepted them. The room's quality of stillness changed slightly, became more focused. While I was occupied with grief, Kazuya continued, with no more emotional weight than if he were discussing rainfall, someone inside this organization was systematically dismantling it from the inside, selling information, redirecting resources, building relationships with our worst rivals that were paid for with your loyalty and your safety. He looked around the room again, and while doing this, that same person arranged for the death of someone I loved, or arranged for the belief in that death which served the same purpose, to ensure I would be too broken to look clearly at what was happening around me. Daiichi's comfortable expression had not moved, but his hands under the table had. I was too broken to look clearly, Kazuya said, for a while, and then I stopped being. He nodded once to Sora, who was standing at the side of the room. Sora opened the door. Ren walked in. The room's reaction was a living thing. Not loud, not a commotion, but a visible wave of response moving through every person present, a collective moment of disbelief reorganizing itself into understanding. People had known Ren in the way people know the person who matters to someone they work for. People had attended the memorial. People had seen the face Kazuya wore for months afterward and understood what it meant without being told. And here was Ren, standing in the doorway of the room, composed and quiet, his eyes moving directly to Daiichi. Daiichi had gone the color of old paper. "Hello, Daiichi," Ren said, and there was nothing in his voice that was frightened of anything, because he was done being frightened of Daiichi, and they both understood this simultaneously. Daiichi rose from his seat, and he was already calculating, already looking toward the doors. But there were people at every door who had known this moment was coming for 2 weeks and had placed themselves accordingly with great care. There was nowhere in this room to go. Kazuya had been thorough, because Kazuya was always thorough. Daiichi stood there for a moment, the calculations visibly failing one by one behind his eyes, and his comfortable expression finished collapsing. What was underneath it was smaller and more ordinary than anyone had probably expected. Kazuya walked around the table. He stopped in front of his cousin, someone he had trusted and grown up beside and given authority to and believed in, and looked at him for a long moment from a distance of about 3 feet. He looked at him with the complete attention he gave to everything important. And then he did something that Daiichi had not prepared for in any of his calculations. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not make the moment dramatic in the way that Daiichi might have used to argue that it was personal and emotional and therefore illegitimate. He was simply quiet. "I am not going to hurt you," Kazuya said, each word exact and placed with care. "What I am going to do is give every piece of evidence in this room, which is considerable and airtight and has already been organized for the appropriate authorities, to people whose job it is to handle exactly this. You are going to lose your position here tonight. You are going to lose your reputation in every room in this city. You are going to lose your freedom, and none of it will be because of anger. None of it will be because of revenge in the loud, petty sense. It will simply be because you did what you did, and there is now a complete and permanent record of it, and the world is going to know." He held Daiichi's gaze. "You tried to use my grief as a tool. You thought it would keep me from seeing clearly. I want you to understand that what is happening to you tonight is happening not in spite of my grief, but because of what I found on the other side of it, because of what you tried to take from me, and what survived your taking." Daiichi said nothing. There was nothing to say. Kazuya stepped back. He turned to Sora. "Make sure the authorities receive everything tonight." He walked to the other side of the room. He sat down. He looked at his hands for a moment, and then he looked at Ren, who was still standing by the door and who had watched this entire thing with the expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a weight to be removed and is experiencing what happens after. Ren exhaled, slowly, all the way out. The room cleared. People moved efficiently. Daiichi was escorted out with the documentation that would end the life he had built. Sora handled the logistics with his usual competence and barely concealed satisfaction. The Black Wolves, learning the full shape of what had happened in the hour that followed the meeting, processed it in the particular way of people who have been working within a betrayal they didn't know was there, with the particular quiet fury of loyalty that realizes it was being used. Eventually, the house was quiet again. Kazuya found himself in his study. He was sitting in the chair behind his desk, but he was not looking at documents. He was not looking at anything in particular. He was simply sitting in the aftermath of something, in the odd weightlessness of a thing long prepared for that has finally happened. The door opened quietly. He did not look up because he knew the sound of that particular knock. 3 times, soft. He had learned it over the past weeks without meaning to. The way you learn the things that matter. Ren came in. He sat on the edge of the desk, which was the only piece of furniture in this study that Kazuya had ever allowed anyone else to use, a habit that went back further than either of them could precisely identify. In the lamplight, with everything finished, he looked tired and steady at the same time. He folded his hands in his lap and looked at Kazuya, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "It's over," Ren said. "Simple. True." "It's over," Kazuya said. Another moment of quiet passed. It was not an empty quiet. It was the good kind, the kind that has room in it, that does not require filling. Then Ren took a breath, and when he spoke again his voice was smaller, not from weakness but from the particular smallness of something that matters a great deal being said out loud. "Kazu," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, even if the honest answer is hard." He looked at his hands briefly, then back up. "Is there anything left? For me, between us?" He did not look away. "I understand if there isn't. I understand that what happened, what I chose, even with the reasons I had for it, cost you something that might not come back. I will be here for Haru regardless. That is not going to change. But I need to know, because I can't keep not knowing, and I've been afraid to ask, and I'm done being afraid of things I need to face. Is there anything left?" Kazuya looked at him. He looked at him for a long moment, the way he looked at things he was being completely honest about. Then he said, "I read your letters 14 times. Ren's expression shifted. "What?" 14 times, Kazuya said again simply. "I have sections memorized. The letter from the night Haru was born. The letter from the 3rd month, where you wrote about the way the rain sounds different in the place you were hiding than it does here, and how you couldn't stop noticing it." He looked at Ren steadily. "And the 4 words you wrote at the end of every single one. I know exactly what they were." I did not need to go back and check. Ren's breath had gone slightly unsteady. "Come back to me," he whispered. His own words. Kazuya stood up. He came around to where Ren was sitting on the edge of the desk, and he stopped very close. Close enough that there was no distance left worth calling distance. Close enough to see Ren's eyes filling at the edges with the tears that arrived every time something was true enough to pull them. "I never left," Kazuya said. His voice was quiet and completely sure. "There was no one else. There was never going to be anyone else. Even when I thought you were gone, even through 2 years of a life I was going through the motions of, I was still yours. In the drawer with the photograph, in every version of every morning." He reached up and put one hand gently against the side of Ren's face. Ren leaned into it immediately, the way someone leans into warmth when they have been cold a very long time. "I am not leaving. I am not going anywhere. I am right here, Ren. I came back. Come back to me too." Ren closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he closed the remaining distance himself, leaning forward into Kazuya's arms, and Kazuya held him, really held him, with both arms and without reservation, the kind of holding that has no performance in it and no uncertainty, just the simple and complete fact of two people being back where they belong after a very long, very wrong absence. Ren's hands gripped the fabric of Kazuya's jacket and stayed there. They stood like that until Ren stopped shaking, which took a little while, and Kazuya held him through all of it without moving. The last scene the narrator chooses to give you happens on an afternoon several months later. It is warm. The garden behind the mansion is in the kind of light that makes everything look like it has been drawn carefully by someone who wanted to get it right. Haru, now a more confident and extremely opinionated walker, is making his determined way across the grass toward a butterfly that has made the reasonable and optimistic decision to land in the garden. His walking is still the walking of someone who is new to it. Slightly wide stance, arms out for balance, enormously committed. He has his father's focus and his other father's warmth, and both of these things live in him at the same time and make him entirely his own person. Kazuya is sitting on the grass. This is a fact that continues to be quietly remarkable to everyone in the household, though no one says so. He is sitting on the actual grass without his jacket, with his sleeves pushed up, watching Haru's expedition across the garden with the full and serious attention he brings to important things. Because it is important. Because Haru is important, in the comprehensive and non-negotiable way that love works when it arrives completely, which is how it arrived for Kazuya, the moment he picked up his son in the kitchen that first morning and felt those small hands grab onto his face. Ren is leaning against him, sitting beside him and leaning against his shoulder the way you lean against something you know is solid and has decided to stay. He is holding his tea, there is always tea, and watching Haru with the expression of someone for whom the world has, after a very difficult detour, turned out to contain the things it was supposed to contain. Haru reaches the butterfly. The butterfly lands on his nose. Haru goes magnificently cross-eyed trying to see it, and the butterfly, choosing this moment with poor timing, departs. Haru sneezes with his whole body and sits down hard on the grass with a sound of surprised impact. He looks at this development for one moment. Then he looks at Kazuya, and Kazuya laughs, the real kind, the unguarded kind, and the kind that sounds like the photograph of two boys on a rooftop sounds when you look at it long enough to remember that joy was always in him somewhere. And Haru decides that whatever just happened was actually very funny, and laughs too, falling sideways, and the butterfly makes its escape into the warm afternoon. Ren watches all of this. He watches Kazuya laugh. He watches Haru's small, triumphant face. He watches the garden and the warm light and this life that they very nearly lost, and instead, by some fierce combination of truth-telling and patience and the particular stubbornness of love that has decided not to end, kept. He leans a little more into Kazuya's shoulder. Kazuya reaches across without looking and takes his hand. They sit like that in the afternoon light, the three of them. The man who came home. The man who had been calling him back across 2 years of silence, and the boy who had his father's eyes and all the best parts of both of them, while the garden holds them in its warm and ordinary light, and the city beyond the walls goes about its business, unknowing, and the story settles into the quiet of its ending, which is not an ending at all, really, just the beginning of something better. Even in all that silence, I kept the letters. Even in all that silence, I kept saying your name. Before you go, this story was made for you. If found you again made you feel something, if you held your breath during the warehouse scene, if the letters broke your heart a little, if you smiled when Haru grabbed Kazuya's nose, then this story did exactly what it was supposed to do. Stories like this one exist because people like you showed up to listen. Drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the reunion? The letters, the revenge, the ending in the garden? I read every single one. Share this story with someone who loves BL romance, enemies to lovers, found family, or just a really good slow burn love story that earns its ending. Someone out there is going to need this story today. Follow and subscribe so you never miss the next story, because if you love the world of Found You Again, there are more worlds coming. More characters who are broken in interesting ways and brave in quiet ones. More love that takes the long road home. And if you want more, Alpha Omegas, Mafia romance, hidden children, betrayal arcs, and love stories that make you feel every single thing? Let me know in the comments. Your requests shape what comes next. This story belongs to everyone who ever loved someone they were afraid to come back to. You are not alone in that. And the best stories, like the best love, do not end. They just keep going, one warm afternoon at a time. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.